I am an African.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Africa for Dummies podcast, where we discuss all things Africa. Joined as always, or hosted as always, by me, Nathan, and always the co-host with the most, Zenge. How you doing, man?
How are you? The year is almost ending. How do you feel about that?
I'm doing. Feel pretty good, but I don't know why, but like every single year, like it feels shorter and shorter. I don't know if you get the same vibe. Like it feels like
Yeah,
just yesterday was January.
might be like age. I saw this weird meme about like this year has gone so fast. I didn't even have time to lose weight, which was really funny. But yeah, it's
Where does
relatable.
the time
Yeah.
where does the time go, right? Yeah, so I think the reason why, for our listeners who are out there, the reason why we're actually doing this episode, I am just like you. I do not know why this episode is happening, but I was just chilling at home and then Zenge hit me up and said, "Yo, something weird is going on in Zambia," right? So Zenge, tell me what were those things that you saw that were pretty weird, or like me? Yeah.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, it's I would say weird, but I guess unusual. But that's the same thing anyway. There's a lot of interest coming into Zambia from multiple areas of the globe. Zambia is not by any means even the biggest, the richest, biggest country in Africa. It's not a major African power,
Although
and
it's
it's not
one of
even.
the safest.
Yeah, so maybe that's why. So there's a lot of international attention that's coming to Zambia. I mean, in a very short space of time. Just the main thing I woke up Nathan and I was like, we need to talk about this is because you see in the last few months, and majority of this is actually not even the last few months, the last like 3 weeks, the richest man in Africa, Aliko Dangote, visited Zambia. Tony Elumenu, also one of the richest and one of the biggest entrepreneurs in Africa, also visited Zambia. President of Israel visited Zambia. Not Netanyahu, by the way.
Really?
I'll go into that
Yeah,
later.
Prime Minister. Yeah. Prime Minister, President.
Yeah, European Union announced $2.3 billion for the Lobito Corridor project, which is the big railway line going from the Atlantic Ocean in through Angola, DRC, and Zambia. And then Donald Trump Jr. happened to be in Zambia for a private vacation. I assume he was somewhere around Livingston, a big tourist city around the Victoria Falls, aka Mosiotunya, in southern Zambia. And HH, Zambia's president, Hakainde Hichilema, was also in a phone call with the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Secretary of State is basically like an external minister or foreign minister. And then there's also the Chinese premier, who is also not the most powerful person in China, second most powerful person, which I'll go into later as well.
Wow.
Li
Okay.
Qiang or Qiang, have I pronounced that? Maybe I'll butcher
I
that.
think
Most
it's
likely.
pronounced Xiang.
Qiang,
No, Zhang is ZH, I think, right?
think so.
So I think
Yeah.
I think Qiang is right, yeah.
Qiang, yeah, we'll just say Qiang.
Yeah.
Apologies to all Chinese listeners.
To all Chinese listeners, we
Yeah,
definitely messed that up. However, okay, so let's go
all right,
through
so we've got six
each
different key things.
6 different guests, right? So let's go through each one of them to kind of understand why this is maybe weird. I mean, it's weird that it's happening at the same time, right? So it kind of seems a little bit weird. But let's start with Dangote, and I think you mentioned Tony Elumelu as well, if I'm not mistaken. Why was this one like interesting for you? Why did you see this one as weird? I mean, Dangote has a plant in Zambia. Couldn't it just be that he was coming to see the plant?
So Dangote's investment in Zambia is worth about 500 million US dollars. He built the massive cement factory in Zambia, and since then it has been employing. So he built a massive cement factory in Zambia in 2015. It was commissioned in 2015 and has produced 1.5 million metric tons per year in terms of cement in dollar. Zambia's copper belt, which is also a major economic hub. And alongside that, he's also got a 30 megawatt capacity power station. And so some of the key things that he talked about is also expanding his interest in Zambia in energy. Zambia faces serious load shedding, power outages. For those that don't know what load shedding is, it's basically blackouts for, the majority of the day. These are long hours of the day with blackouts, and it's hampering the economy. So, and also, so Dangote Cement Zambia is also one of the most competitive manufacturing companies in Zambia, and employs more than 1,200 people, and benefiting indirectly 5,000 people. And so aside from being the richest black man, not just the richest African, the richest black man, I think, in the world, he also is interested in expanding cooperation with Zambia in areas like electricity. And he's particularly interested in coal. The president of Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema, calls it clean coal, but there's a lot of controversy around what clean coal really is. And
Is
so
there
this
such
also
a thing?
represents pushback from like smaller countries with their interest in using sort of resources like coal rather than switching completely to renewable sources of energy like
Non-renewable.
wind farming and
like solar.
yeah. So
And
yeah, there's a clear sort of urgency from HH to get that power thing kicked off, because that's like the biggest sort of Achilles heel for his government and
problem.
Zambian people, among Zambian people, the power outages, and it's like anything will do really. So even coal, like coal is also on the table with regards to power generation in Zambia. Tony Elumenu is an entrepreneur. He's the owner of one of the biggest banks in Africa, United Bank for Africa. And he was actually on a tour of several other African countries. He was in Eastern Africa, Southern Africa. He met presidents in Kenya, Zambia, Mozambique, Congo, Brazzaville, Rwanda, and the DRC. And he's basically talking about supporting entrepreneurs. He met other entrepreneurs in Zambia, and he has the Tony Elumenu Foundation. It's sort of like giving seed capital to ambitious entrepreneurs in Zambia. And I think he gives seed capital to about 350 Zambian entrepreneurs, and indirectly that provides around 16,000 jobs in Zambia. So these are big moves in terms of entrepreneurship, that type of growth, and small scale to medium Zambian entrepreneurs. And he's also expressed interest in things like energy as well. So the energy factor is a big deal. But another aspect is also Zambia. Zambia recently also hosted a delegation of bankers from global bankers. So it was led by one of the largest mines in Zambia, First Quantum Minerals, chief executive. His name is Tristan Pascal. And the delegation also included Bank of America, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. And these banks, just to give you a figure, right? A figure.
That's pretty deep. Like, would you know why they chose Zambia as a place to have this meeting? Because this is starting to get a little bit weird, right? It's starting to sound like Zambia is becoming the next Illuminati. Like,
I haven't even finished yet. Like the amount of interest is insane. The combined, just to give you a figure, right? Zambia's GDP is less than $30 billion, right? The combined market capitalization of these banks that I have just mentioned, right? Bank of America, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, the combined market capitalization of these companies is $1.2 trillion. This is a massive figure. This is basically, for comparison, it's larger than the GDP of countries of Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland. But Zambia, forget about that. It's massive. And then combined total assets is $12.2 trillion. This is bigger than any GDP of any country except China and the United States. So these guys all have had, they haven't got offices in Zambia, but there's clear interest, right? And then also, again, major Qatari consortium called Al Mansour also had a $20 billion deal with Zambia. Basically, this agreement included, this was done in September 2025. It's basically a non-binding memoranda. So sort of like exploratory, so not legally a contract, but the stated value of interest was like 19 to 20 billion. And so areas like energy, mining, infrastructure, real estate, but there's a lot of skepticism about how this will look like, where the money is going to go. But what we can see here is there's a clear interest from people with big pockets and companies with big pockets, both in Africa, outside Africa. And I think it's increasingly becoming, of course, the government will tout this as something about stability. Indeed, Zambia's stock exchange has been performing very, very well. It was considered one of the best.
Was it? Well, yeah, it was one of the best performing, if not, yeah,
performing stock exchanges in the world, or in Zambia, actually.
in the world. Yeah, that was what was shocking. In the world,
Yeah.
that was like
driven by copper, sort of the increase in the copper boom, copper demand and prices and stuff like that. And copper production also increased by 18%. In 2025, and then also inflation seems to be improving. The kwacha is becoming a bit stronger, so there's a lot of things that the government is very happy about and would tout that there.
yeah.
But there's not a lot of and my point is on this aspect, the private aspect. There's not a lot of clarity. Aside from what's already there and what already exists, with the figures from the Tony Elumenu and Dangote investments in Zambia and Zambian people, there's not too much clarity on things like the Qatari investment and what exactly those big banks from the United States are going to be doing in Zambia.
Weird.
How that will manifest. Will it mean, more venture capitals, access to finance? I mean, I don't even know these financial things, but I'm just like assuming maybe there'll be more money available for bigger investors.
The real question is if that money is going to trickle down, as we discussed in our previous episode with the Tazana, basically discussing the economics of the situation of Zambia and why Zambia is, on paper, is doing quite well, but for Zambians, it doesn't seem to be working as well. The question that I'm asking myself, to be honest, is what are they seeing that Zambians aren't, Like, that's the question that I'm really asking myself. Because when you ask the local and average Zambian, they seem to tell you that, I think if you saw the comments on our last episode, I think some people were, sort of expressing this sentiment, that Zambia is kind of, going under. But then you're seeing, these deals, and these are not the only ones that, like, as you said, these extremely wealthy organizations coming together in Zambia. So the question is, like, what are they seeing that the ordinary Zambian isn't seeing? That's a very interesting place to, I think, start. And for those who are listening, maybe you can drop a comment in under the video to explain what are we not seeing that others are seeing. So I'm just going to put a pin in that conversation because we still have a lot that's going on and is flying relatively under the radar. But you talked about the president of Israel coming to Zambia. First of all, never knew that Israel had a president. I knew that they had a prime minister, right? I mean, very famous guy. But I didn't know that they had a president. And why is he coming to Zambia? I mean, the only thing I think we largely share is that, Zambia is this Christian nation. So always been sympathetic towards Israel, right? If I'm not mistaken. So.
Well, not always. Just to give you a backdrop. Right. Of course, Zambia's president, Mr. Herzog, was in Zambia in August 20. No, sorry, that was the foreign minister.
You mean Israel's president? Sorry.
Israel's president was in Zambia a couple of weeks ago, and that was a couple of months after the embassy opened in August 2025. For the first time in 50 years, there's a reopening of the Israeli embassy in Lusaka in Zambia. This comes around 10 years since Zambia opened an embassy in Israel. So it hasn't always been great. Zambia has had a relationship with Israel since the early 1960s. Zambia got independence in 1964. And Israel was formed controversially in the late 1940s. So Zambia's relationship with Israel under the first president, Kenneth Kaunda, was good. The University of Zambia was built by Israeli manufacturers in 1963. And also another aspect is UNZA funding a lot of it was also crowdfunded from ordinary Zambians. Some people even delivered goats. And so the Israelis were there to work with the government to build our first and biggest university. And this is an important fact. I think many people don't recognize this. Zambia had less than 100 university graduates, and I'm probably even being generous. It's probably less than 50.
Yeah, by saying
university graduates, and now we have tens of thousands. The problem is we have too many graduates and too few jobs. And partly due to that is because of UNZA, University of Zambia. And so when you go to Unza, a lot of the infrastructure you see was built by Israelis. However, Zambia cut relations with Israel abruptly in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. This was basically a war, a surprise attack from Egypt and Syria and other Arab countries on Israel, trying to reshape the geopolitics after Israel had taken the Sinai sort of piece of land in an earlier war before that. So it was sort of like a revenge war, like, you took my territory, you want to take it back, type of thing. So since then, Zambia had no relations with Israel. Diplomatic relations were cut. And Kaunda was a steadfast supporter for Palestine. However, Kaunda left in 1991 and Chiluba became president. Frederick Chiluba became president. And the Cold War had ended by then. And but also priorities in Zambia's foreign policy had changed. Chiluba, as a person, postured himself as a Christian leader, and he declared Zambia a Christian nation, and in the early 1990s. And you see, the relationship with Israel resuscitated 1990s, and you can sort of trace Zambian leaders positioning themselves as champions of Christianity with our relationship with Israel, because it makes for very, very good optics. As a Zambian leader,
I think, if
political
I'm not mistaken, there was a very famous video of sorry to cut you off, but there's a very famous video of Chiluba going to Israel, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or am I just imagining that?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of visits to Israel. I believe every president every president of Zambia has visited Israel, except Mwanawasa, who didn't visit Israel during his presidency. At least there's no record of it. Chiluba visited Israel in 1995. Rupia Banda visited Israel. Zambia's fourth president visited Israel in 2014. Sorry, that was the funeral, and that was after Banda's presidency. So in one way or another, presidents have all visited Israel either during or after their presidency or right before their presidency. But two presidents that are significant in this relationship is Edgar Lungu and Haggai Hichilema. Right? Many people sort of accuse HH, like those who are anti-Israel, accuse HH of building closer relations with Israel. But really, a lot of this started during Lungu's presidency. The embassy was opened in 2015. And then 1 year later, Lungu also announced a public holiday, a day of national prayer and fasting. Again, presidents who want to virtual signal to Zambia's Christian base want to make sure that Israel is on their side. They look like friends of Israel. Zambians, of course, are not fully engaged with wars like in Gaza, where tens and thousands of people have died. But there is a lot of sympathy from parties like the Socialist Party, Fred Membe, who aligns himself very strongly with the Palestinian causes. But there is a general mood of sort of ignorance towards it. The touch point to Israel for Zambians is biblical. It's biblical first.
Mainly biblical.
It's biblical first. So in 2016, Lungu went on a state visit. 2022, HH went on a state visit to Israel, and they met Benjamin Netanyahu. Both of them met Benjamin Netanyahu, and they met the presidents. But our relationship with Zambia's relationship with Israel spans like military, drones, flight simulators, then also agri-tech on irrigation. When the president of Israel came to Zambia, he talked about irrigation and smart agricultural systems, which Israel is quite famous for. And many people have sort of concluded that they're coupling this also with this narrative that HH is pro-Western, although it's not necessarily accurate when you look at the voting patterns. They're strictly looking at the multilateral actions that Zambia is making on Israel. 7.2% of votes in UN General Assembly from about 2015 up to 2024 have been actually against Israel, or they have been in favor. Yeah, either they're against or abstaining. So they're not necessarily in favor of Israel in many of their votes. Otherwise, what people are looking at is the bilateral relations. The bilateral relations are revamping massively. But when it comes to multilateral forum, Zambia is a bit meek. It still supports the two-state solution. It recognizes Palestine and Israel. HH spoke to the outgoing Palestinian ambassador a few months ago, and he was the dean of the diplomats. So it's not this absolute shift towards Israel. There's still recognition of Palestine, although Zambia is not, South Africa, right? That's the main distinction that people are. Zambia, right in the name.
South Africa has a much more closer, there's a much deeper history there. I think, as you mentioned, that I think with Zambia, there was this period where nothing was going on, and then now you have this connection that I believe I would say is mainly biblical, right?
The biblical part plays for very good optics. I mean, HLM's Facebook page on Sunday, I mean, for those that don't understand Zambian politics, Zambian presidents always quote something on Sunday or something. Now HH is Seventh-day Adventist, which means they go to church on Saturdays. Saturdays is Sabbath, right? Yeah. So he posted a happy Sabbath sort of message, and he posted him with the president of Israel. So you can see that there's clear virtual signaling to Christian people that my affiliation with Israel, that's for also makes me, a bit more closer to, Christian ethos and Christian history,
Values, yeah.
and so on and so forth. Although
So
Zambia avoided talking about ICJ genocide stuff, they don't believe that that's the right way to go about things. So that's the difference between Zambia and South Africa. They're not really interested in using the genocide type of language and
right.
crusade against Israel. And that's basically
Right.
his history with Israel in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you for taking us down that road. I have to say thank you very much. But now, just to put it, like, to summarize it in a
There's also
concise...
quite a big Jewish community. Although, like, I wouldn't say Israel. Yeah, there's Zambian Jews.
Actually, they are actually no, they actually are
Yeah.
people who migrated, I think, to
Polish.
Zambia. Very few now, much few, because I think some of them migrated back. There's even some Messianic Jewish churches in Zambia.
There was Polish immigrants who left during the World War II and just during other pogroms before that, who came to Zambia when Zambia was a British colony, and they stayed. There's even a Jewish museum now in Livingstone, in Zambia's tourism capital. So right next to that, I've been there. It's actually quite nice. Train station, this railway museum is right next to the Jewish museum. And one of the most prominent Jews in Zambia, Zambian Jews, was Simon Zukas, who was a freedom fighter.
Simon Zukas.
Yeah, he was a freedom fighter. He also fought for liberation, but he also fought against Kaunda's one-party state for democracy. And then when democracy was sort of shaking when Lungu was president, he also spoke out against Lungu. So his entire life has been dedicated to Zambia's freedom and democracy. So I think he's probably the most well-known Zambian Jewish person.
Yeah. I think we went a little bit, which I definitely don't mind. We definitely went into, like, the history and the nature of this, which is perfect, right? But now, just to get back to, like, what we were discussing. So if you were to summarize this as, why is the president of Israel in Zambia, just in a brief, like, few sentences, like, what do you think the reason is, and why now, if possible?
Oh, that's a good one. We haven't addressed that. I think he's in Zambia because he needs to express that there are African countries that are still on Israel's side. And the comments and tweets from the Israeli embassy in South Africa actually put Southern Africa is supporting Israel, and that really pissed off a lot of South Africans. Right. So he went to Zambia and he went to the DRC. DRC is part of the Southern African regional bloc, but DRC geographically is kind of everywhere.
DRC is in everywhere.
But I mean, Israel's president and Israel's foreign minister, I think his name is Mr. Sar, Gideon Sar. They visited Rwanda, West Africa. So they have been lobbying quite aggressively to get African countries on their side, because Africa is a major voting bloc in the United Nations. The Israeli ambassador to the AU some years back was actually kicked out of the African Union because South Africa and Algeria could not tolerate it. They just said, to hell with that, you're not going to, because Israel has been seeking observer status in the AU. The reason that they want that is because it gives you some sort of privileged access to certain meetings that Africa is deciding, and you want to influence African minds. But the main reason I think he came to Zambia was because Zambia looks like a reliable partner, stable, peaceful country. It's not a crazy country. It won't delegitimize you. But at the same time, it also is like an in-your-face to South Africa, which is literally right, not too far. It's a bit of a flex as well to have Zambia on your side in a region that people would think South Africa has control of.
Right. That's a great, okay. That's interesting to sort of see. I wonder what the South African government would say about that. Putting another pin on that, you also mentioned the Lobito corridor, right? This is something that has been quite popular in Zambia, especially I think towards the end of Joe Biden's presidency. Uh, so now I think the EU is now getting more involved with this, right? So you mentioned $2.3 billion. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. So the many people, when they talk about the Lobeto Corridor, they talk about the United States and they talk about China and that whole rivalry. It is very much a United States led thing, but the EU also wants in on it because it also wants to position itself as a key developmental and infrastructure partner for Africa. And the Lobeto Corridor is the most hyped about and probably one of the biggest infrastructure projects going on in Africa. And it's like a big example of whether African countries can actually work with superpowers very well. And the EU wants to have in on it, and it also wants to rival the other powers, just as China is rivaling the United States. But the EU is also a country that, a supranational
Yeah.
super national entity. I don't want to call it an intergovernmental organization because it's a bit different to that intertwined legal things there. So it has interests. Member states have interests. There's Germany has electric vehicles that is trying to compete with China, and raw materials are all in Congo, in Zambia, in Angola. And being on good terms with these countries is important. There was an investment forum in Lusaka for the Lobito Corridor, as well as other business sort of engagements last week actually. And a lot of people came, and that's where it was announced that 2.3 billion euros was pledged and announced for the Lobito Corridor. And America is already ahead of that game.
Can I ask you a question?
China has already rivaled it with saying they'll upgrade Tazara, which goes the other direction.
You know, it'd be funny. Wouldn't it be funny if Zambia could use that 2.3 billion to pay off its debt, just to repurpose it and then go? That would be funny. But
I think
because
I think that's called misappropriation.
misappropriation of funds, no? Because all these announcements, it's like a lot of money, and it's like, oh,
Yeah,
why
so
not
long as
just,
look, and this is money for an actual project. Like this to be clear.
Yeah, I know. but I think I'm actually drawing to a really cool point here. Because it's like, it's more, hey, you guys can be in debt, but we still need our resources. Like, so it's still very extractive, right?
Yeah.
Than sort of like investing in a way. I suspect, now you tell me if I'm wrong here, I have a guess that the EU also wants to be a big player in the whole AI world. And
Yeah.
the US,
Yes.
there
So
is a really big AI race between the West and the East, mainly China. And I think, and as you mentioned with the electric cars and everything, so I think the EU is like, whoa,
do you think that
we're
they
sort
feel
of
like they're
losing
being
ground.
overlooked?
Yeah, they're like, whoa, we're losing ground here. We also need to sort of make sure that we're also, because I think the auto industry within, mainly Germany, hasn't been performing very well, right? And isn't performing very well right now in Germany. So I think this is also maybe just one of the ways for them to ensure that they are not left behind, I think.
Yeah.
That's
And
a
also,
suspicion of mine.
it's an interesting thing because, first of all, the Global Gateway is supposed to mobilize over 300 billion in investing through a sort of Team Europe and then its member states, and then in building infrastructure all over the world. China was the first country to have like some kind of strategic infrastructural drive called Belt and Road Initiative.
The Belt and Road Initiative, right?
BRI, one of the examples perhaps is the Standard Gauge Railway in Kenya. We talked about this in our episode on China. Maybe it can be linked down there. So China has been at this game for a while. America has had various attempts at it. They had the Build Back Better under Joe Biden. Then they had lots of acronyms going on. But
BBB. And that's
this
the
one,
big, beautiful bill.
yeah. This was the main. This was the main. This was the main sort of initiative during the Biden era, but it has been an issue. Has been something for a while. African countries now, money has come, and international interest has come. It was like a sleeping project, but without any money. Now it has money. It's just how will African countries on this line of rail use that money to their advantage? How exactly are they going to leverage this? Because there is enormous amount of interest. It was an Africa infrastructure summit a few weeks ago. By the way, the EU-AU heads of state summit is EU-AU, so European Union, African Union heads of state and government summit in Luanda next week on Monday, the 24th of November. And then a couple of weeks ago was a massive infrastructure summit for the African infrastructure summit, and they pledged about a few billions. I think it was 7 billion for Africa to mobilize funds to start funding their own infrastructure. You can verify that. It can be put up somewhere. But there's a clear, and that summit, by the way, was in Angola, in Luanda. So not ironic that it is in Luanda, because that's where the Lobito corridor, the mouth of the Lobito corridor is in the town of Lobito. So all of this stuff is not happening in silos. There's clear competition, and there's clear sort of momentum, and how all of this is going to shape bigger summits like the upcoming EU summit would be very important, because once you have presidents in the room, they can agree to stuff, and it will just be up for the rest, the smaller guys, to start now acting on it, because there's clear money that has been pledged at multiple summits and meetings. So yeah, maybe the EU, as you said, the interest is probably being driven from this notion that they might be losing out in this AI race, a digital race, and the need for cobalt and copper. I mean, Congo has over 70% of the world's cobalt. And then both Zambia and Congo have huge chunks of copper. And on that same route, there's gold, diamond. So yeah, it's a big deal. So I guess that's why there's such interest in every single Lobito corridor country, because it's it's now like almost a global project for minerals. It's not an Africa-centric project. So there's international.
I mean, just recent. It's not only on international level. I think also like a private company. Well, can I call it a private company? But I think last year or this year when like we had Bill Gates and other people also announcing that they wanted to start, having projects in Zambia as well. Kind of nice to be a Zambian right now. It feels like we're being wooed or something. Like
Yeah, Cobalt. The company is called Cobalt. Is it the AI, the mining company? Zambia, which is owned by sort of tech billionaires, owned by the owner of OpenAI. Yeah, Bill Gates, and Zuckerberg, they all have interests in.
Right. And now that we're sticking to the West, right? You mentioned that Donald Trump Jr., not Donald Trump, but his son, took a vacation. Don Jr., as he's famously known, took a vacation in Zambia. Now, was this vacation? Was this just a vacation, or do you think there's something behind that? Because it seems like when you mentioned it, you think that there could be more.
Yeah, there could be more, but we don't know. It's just rumors and speculation. He was in Zambia for a private visit. Trump sons have been to Africa before for hunting purposes in Southern Africa. He was probably on vacation, but he did meet, the tourism minister had a video of him trying to chat up Don Jr. Don Jr., I don't think knew who the tourism minister was, but he was like, they all got along in the end. But HH also met him. I don't know where. Maybe, I assume he was in Livingston, because that's a tourism center, and it's, it's beautiful, Victoria Falls and all those things, aka Mosetunia. So the HH posted their meeting very briefly.
Or shouldn't you say Mosetunia, aka Victoria Falls? Sorry.
But the other name for Victoria Falls is it Shumbu Namutitima? Something. There's so many. There's like at least two local names.
Okay. Yeah.
So HH posted on his page, basically, we are delighted to meet Mr. Donald Trump Jr. during his private vacation in Zambia. We acknowledge his appreciation for the beauty of our country, the warmth of our people, and opportunities that Zambia has to offer for U.S. investors. We conveyed our warm regards to his father, U.S. President Donald J. Trump, and affirmed our commitment to fostering enhanced US-Zambia relations. Hakainde Hichilema, President of Zambia. What does this mean? Look, Donald Trump, people are saying, why is the president of Zambia meeting some president's son? Like, this is dumb. Okay, look, so in IR, international relations, there's power metrics. I'm not saying we should humble ourselves or anything, but like there's a realization that, and this will also be something I'll talk about in the next one where we talk about Marco Rubio. Why is HH meeting people that are not necessarily his counterparts? I think it's also opportunism and just acing the moment. Wherever is there, like talk to them, schmooze with them, see what they get them to like Zambia, and maybe they'll invest or something. But it's also the fact that Zambia is a smaller country. Like we are with less than $30 billion. The United States is over 20 trillion United States dollars. So it doesn't, I mean, in as much as you'd like, it would be nice to have another president meet another president immediately, which could happen, it can still happen, but there will be that like asymmetrical type of hierarchy meeting because Zambia is simply not economically, militarily, politically, geopolitically a sizable equal to the United States in power. With Xi Jinping, there's no way he's going to meet Don Jr. So that's just realistically, pragmatically speaking. And HH is obsessed
basically
and economic interest. So whoever is there, try and smooth. Don Trump Jr. is worth over $500 million US. Like he's not not just like some kid sitting in the living room and just like chewing like bubble gum or something. Yeah. And he's also very influential in MAGA circles, Make America Great Again sort of circles, which have a very huge influence in the White House because Donald Trump is the president. And there's been a lot of discussion about how his kids influence himself, Donald Trump. So it makes sense that some kind of effort to be made to catch Don Jr. while he's in Zambia and then try and see what you can get out of it. Mind you, Zambia has been put on a visa restriction list, right? They're charging Zambians $5,000 to $15,000 just to go to the United States on some visa bond. It's like it's a bond, not a charge. But Zambia is not in good books so far as free movement is concerned. Although investment,
there's actually more to that as well. Like it's not only apparently it's not only the amount of money that you're paying, but you actually have to enter and exit through specific ports of entry in the U.S. So it's actually really strict, which is odd, right? So on one hand, you're restricting, but on the other hand, you're like, hey, let's make some investments together. So basically what you're saying is that people...
And, Americans come to Zambia visa free, by the way. So Don Jr. didn't need a visa.
Precisely. So basically what you're saying is that, like, people are asking, asking Hakainde Hichilema, why are you meeting the son of the U.S. president? And Hakainde Hichilema said, I did business. That's...
Well, he didn't say that, but like I think that's
I know, but I'm just saying that's the motivation behind it, right?
Do what you gotta do.
So you gotta do what you gotta do, man. Like So moving on to another. I mean, now I would say like this is a little bit now like a level higher, right? So
official
had a call with Marco Rubio, right? So what was the reason for this call? Is there anything important that we should know?
So this is much more advanced. Marco Rubio worked with Hakainde Hichilema, and the State Department basically said Hichilema and the Secretary of State, who's like a foreign minister, an external minister, of the United States, basically reaffirming that President Trump is committed to partnering with African countries. Let me just read this. To advance meaningful action on economic growth, expand U.S. private sector investment, support our shared economic goals. The Secretary and President Hichilema also discussed new approaches to deliver tangibly on shared priorities, including robust private sector growth, stronger Zambian health systems. A few days ago, U.S. agreed to give Zambia another 1.5 billion United States dollars in health sector grant. Right? This is not a loan, it's a grant for the next 5 years. So this will be money to support things from, HIV, malaria, antenatal health care, and the health minister was, very happy about it. So from 2026 to 2030. So they might have also discussed that, but also remember that Zambia has had issues with financial compliance and being accountable for its resources. There was about some millions of dollars were suspended from Zambia earlier this year. There's been issues about healthcare spending. Medicines being stolen and being misappropriated. And the U.S. ambassador to Zambia spoke about this before, and it caused a bit of a row. The Ministry of Health had to come and sort of firefight. So this is a good sign that maybe at least negotiations have worked, and there's some kind of commitment to do better. So the health sector has been famous for, like, a lot of misappropriation of funds and corruption. Doctors who steal the medicine and take it and sell it privately because maybe they're not paid, things like that. And then it becomes really terrible for people that don't have the connections and don't have the money, because you expect free healthcare for things like antiretroviral drugs or malaria drugs, which Zambia faces chronically, although there has been progress historically. So there is an incentive to continue funding, and Zambia is only one of 16 out of 54 countries in Africa to partner with the United States in sort of health. This is according to the Minister of Health of Zambia. So that aspect. And then there's obviously geopolitical aspects. Some people are commenting and saying the United States is happy that Zambia is a friend of Israel. So that's why they're calling him. But I don't know if Zambia can really do anything aside from just pursue their own interests. Even if we were against Israel, there's not much that we can do aside from align ourselves with the bigger power, So I think also the discussion was also on how to convert from aid to investment. Obviously, Lobito Corridor was discussed because that's a big issue in the United States for both Biden and Trump. So yeah, I hope the visa restriction was also discussed, but I don't know. But clearly, I'm pretty sure the discussion involved healthcare funding, but also geopolitical / economic things like Lobito Corridor, rival in China, copper supply chains, those types of things. So even though the statement seems rather vague, there's some things that you can kind of feed out from, new approaches to deliver tangibly on shared priorities. So things like healthcare. HH talked about how US aid cuts were a wake-up call for African countries to start funding their own things. So that's perhaps a new approach that Marco Rubio probably welcomes, because Donald Trump simply doesn't want to continue funding African things or just general things that don't give direct interest to the United States in its America First policy that's supposed to generate more income. Although people would contest that, obviously. Healthy people are supposed to be productive people. But also, are you going to be funding African countries forever? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think that should be the idea.
Drop a comment
Yeah.
under the video.
Private sector growth, all of those things. So that's what I think was discussed. A new direction towards more trade. Most likely that was featured. And health obviously was discussed. It was discussed because it says Zambian health systems. And then I think regional rivalry.
Yeah. No, hopefully some of these things do actually end up manifesting. So moving away from the West now, going to Qatar. What was going on with Qatar again? I think I forgot.
Qatar. So in Qatar, there was Al Mansour Holdings. So there's a company called Al Mansour Holdings. They say it's private, but it's got, state and royal connections. So Al Mansour Holdings, I did mention that already. It's a $20 billion deal, and they're investing in a lot of things from energy, mining, infrastructure, real estate. But there's also a lot of skepticism because such huge amounts of this would be the biggest financial investment MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, in Zambia's history, because this is 2/3 of our GDP. It's also a partner that Zambia has never really had a track record with, so it's a bit of an unproven partner. The Al Mansour lacks a lot of public track record of successfully executing single investments of this magnitude, so this is a new thing for them as well. But other Qatar entities have done these things before in other countries, but perhaps countries that can actually take the load, like the United Kingdom or France or something. And Qatar has also stretched its influence. But I think one thing I'd like to mention before maybe we go to the China aspect is I think a lot of people look at this and they're a bit frightened, and they sort of don't understand, why is all of this attention coming and so on. And, the funny thing is, I think Zambians are also a bit overwhelmed. And when I say Zambians, I mean even the the officials, people in official capacity. Let me just look for
What makes you
that.
say that?
Yeah, I'm going for it. Let me just look for that. The economic advisor to the president of Zambia, Jito Kayumba, had a bit of a, I mean, I wouldn't say a fight because he didn't respond to Linda Kasonde. Basically, he wrote, he had a, when HH took the photo of him having a phone call with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States, Jito Kayumba wrote something about praising the king. And let me just look for the exact quote so I don't...
Praising the king? It's a bit weird.
Very strange. I don't understand.
That's
with merciness and truth. Let me. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So Linda Kasonde replied. So basically, Jito Kayumba wrote this with a picture basically of Hakainde Hichilema sitting on a table in his presidential office, flanked by the foreign minister and then Bradford Machila, who is sort of what you'd call a chief of staff. You know, he's the top of the hierarchy in terms of State House advisors. And then Jito Kayumba is a popular economic advisor to Hakainde Hichilema. He's got quite a big, huge social media following. And what he wrote in his tweet was, "Mercy and truth preserve the king, and by loving kindness he upholds his throne." Proverbs 20:28.
Okay.
Right. Now this is...
What does that mean?
So Linda Kasonde, who is the former Law Association of Zambia president, who I've had on our podcast before, she said, "I come in peace, full stop. We have a democracy in Zambia, not a monarchy. We elect our leaders and choose when to let them go. Our elected leaders govern the country. They do not rule over us. Please do not confuse the two." So it's clear that not everyone likes that statement because he implied it was a biblical statement. Perhaps he was talking about trust in the president. But clearly it has not rubbed everyone the right way. Maybe he could have been a bit more careful with his words. Using words like king and stuff like that is a bit much. So the reason I'm saying this is because it looks like people are overwhelmed and like overjoyed, like, wow, we are not, it's showing that we're not used to these things, right? We are not a superpower where it's normal for major power, even foreign secretaries, to be calling the president, right? I don't think there'll be this much excitement if it was in a country like South Africa or Egypt, major African countries. Not. And it definitely wouldn't be something highly like sort of celebrated on private pages in countries like China. All right. So
I mean, South Africa is hosting, is it the G7, right? It's
G20.
G20, yeah. Sorry, pardon me. Yeah, the G20 meeting, and there's I don't see anyone, saying God bless the king. So there is...
And everyone except, by the way, that's an interesting thing that you mentioned, that everyone except Marco Rubio will be there and the United States representatives, because Donald Trump doesn't want to engage South Africa because of the supposed genocide against African and white people, which we discussed in an episode, actually.
That's interesting that story is still going. I was actually going through some of our old videos, and not only did we discuss it, but I think we had Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh on the podcast, who also discussed this in, I think, a much, much more balanced view. So for our listeners who are interested in the whole South Africa-America beef, if you really want to get like down to the, did I say brass tacks? I don't know. I think I'll say brass tacks. I don't know if that's correct, but I'll say brass tacks. Get down, whatever that means. Please check out that video. I think it's really cool.
We also did more recent videos of it, and in the meeting between Trump and Ramaphosa, if you want to find out the true when it really got down, actual fight. We did that with Keenan Isaacs as well. So so this is so just to add one more, maybe Marco Rubio is also calling HH just again, maybe another one up on South Africa, just to be like, and because South Africans South African Twitter sphere or X sphere, whatever you want to call it, they are like tweeting it and saying Zambia is a province of America. It's rubbing them the wrong way. That's a country here. Like Sophie Mokoena, for example, she hasn't posted about the Chinese premier coming to Zambia, but she posted first about Israel. Mboiseni Ndlovu also posted about Israel. It's really upsetting South Africa, that Israel relationship. But then even the Marco Rubio one is also upsetting a lot of commentators from South Africa that are watching in Zambia. So clearly the United States, some people say divide and rule, but I don't fall into such sort of terms, because I believe countries...
Why don't you? Because that's the first thought that comes to mind. So what makes you say that?
Look, you can look at it in one way. For me, I look at it in terms of interest. And that's what, when I said Qatar, I don't think I went into it when I was talking about small state agency. which was our very first podcast that we discussed. How exactly is Zambia going to interpret this into its foreign policy interests? And are its foreign policy interests cohesive? Zambia has two pillars on foreign policy interests: peace and security, stability, and then economic diplomacy. It used to just be economic diplomacy. So when you are engaging these countries like Israel, right? How much are you getting insofar as Zambians being able to? I mean, it's really a very pragmatic, non-emotional type of foreign policy, because majority of it is economic. Although they say peace and stability, Zambia has a very small role or influence in peace and stability. Maybe they just vote in one direction or the other, but really the core.
Well, I mean, in the past, it did have an influence on peace and security, but
It used to. Now it's purely economic. Actually, the addition of peace and security was a nice.
Yeah.
It was a nice addition, but I mean, it's economic. The president is much more versed with economic affairs and foreign direct investment than brokering peace in Eastern DRC, or Sudan. Zambia has barely opinion on these things.
Right.
I mean, we have our direct immediate interests on peace and stability, but we don't really go out of our way to intervene or try and broker.
Right.
But really, it's economic, right? And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. Like, it's purely pragmatic. It's it's really.
It's all about the Israel, money. It's really. Yeah.
If I'm looking at
Israel, Zambia just looked at South Africa and said, "Hey, listen, it's nothing personal."
This is not related to South Africa. Like, bilaterally, this is not. It's not. Yeah, but it's literally, even when it comes to human rights. And also Zambia, and like when I talk about small state agency or like smart power, let me just explain this to you. When you are a small state, a weak state, I mentioned Zambia's GDP, Zambia's population size, our ability to influence is very small, right? So you have to be pragmatic and say, okay, what can I actually do to assert my interests, right? A superpower is a country that militarily, politically, economically, culturally has the capacity to wield influence, not only in its region, but in various areas of the world, right? The United States has got ships and flags in Antarctica, all right? That's the extent where there's where no one is able to patrol in the Pacific Ocean, the United States can. China increasingly can do that and can compete with that. And then other European countries that used to be big powers also have that type of significant presence. So when you're a small power, your job now is to say, okay, how can I negotiate this? Where do I, and it's it's about modeling yourself so that superpowers find you useful, but you can take that usefulness and milk from it your national interests, right? Look at Qatar. Right. And I know like Pan-Africans get so pissed off, like US based and so on. Qatar, right? Qatar saw in the Gulf War, the first Gulf War in the early 1990s, Kuwait was invaded and taken over by Saddam Hussein from Iraq, because Saddam Hussein was pissed about some kind of oil prices and him not getting the money that he lost during the war with Iran, which was in the 80s. So in the 1990s, and I'm really simplifying here, so those who are Arabic political experts, don't kill me. But so Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and Kuwait was an ally of the United States, and it was a small little country compared to Iraq. Iraq was a big country that could flex. So Qatar is not that far from Kuwait. So if you are Qatar, and in the 1980s, Qatar wasn't really something to speak of. No one even knew what Qatar was. Like, if you ask your parents, did you know anyone from Qatar? Did you think the World Cup would be in Qatar in the 1980s? It'd be like a joke, right? So Qatar just looked at it and said, okay, Kuwait has been invaded by Iraq like that, right? And it had to cry to the United States to come. If the United States didn't come, that's the end of Kuwait, gone. Because Iraq took Kuwait in like less than a couple of weeks. So Qatar saw that, and then it saw opportunities. You identify and you say, okay, this superpower looks like when you're a small state, you also have to, as I said, make yourself useful to superpowers in a way that you get something out of it. How can Qatar survive, avoid invasion or possible invasion from major countries that it might have loggerheads with, like Saudi Arabia or Iraq, right? Because Qatar wanted to charter a more independent avenue for themselves rather than just be like a satellite servient state to Saudi Arabia, which was much bigger, or be threatened by Iraq. So Qatar basically copied other countries that have been allies of major states. They decided, okay, United States, you know what? Why don't you build a massive military base here? Gigantic airport, all your ships and your aircraft carriers can come and sit here. Because what? The United States is so far in the West, and it might need someone that's closer to flex its powers, right?
Yeah.
So before 9/11, Qatar, was it before 9/11? Around that time, 2001, Qatar offered to build a military base for the United States, and they built it. And guess what? The American invasion of Iraq, of Saddam Hussein, much of their resources came from the Qatar military base. I think it's called Al-Udeida or something. So that is almost like a guarantee that this superpower has a direct interest in my survival, and therefore anything that happens to me would be a concern to that superpower. Which is what Israel does perfectly. Small state power agency, tiny little country, very few population, but its ability to, Israel even does more, because its ability to weave interests and lobby interests within the United States caucuses and the support base it has, which is considerably dwindling in the United States, but it's got a capacity to call Congress people and say, oh, by the way, consider Israel when you're thinking about this thing. I don't really like this part of your law, directly in the legislative system and decision making for other countries. So if you're a small state, your job is to say, what does this superpower need? What do I need? How can I make myself useful to this? I'm not saying Zambia should have military base. Calm down. How can I make myself useful? All right. And how can I take from it as well? Right. So Qatar got a military base. Now the monarchy and the ruling system survives because America has a direct investment in ensuring that the status quo exists. At least the status quo protects their interest, right? And so that means Qatar is now a special ally, right? A special ally of the United States. So no country will have the guts to invade Qatar, because the United States, you also be trying to invade the United States.
You would be, exactly.
Of course, people say Israel, I think they threw a missile, there was a missile or something in Qatar, but that caused such a huge alarm, and it was clear that, okay, that's a no-go. Like, you shouldn't do that. America even condemned Israel. You shouldn't do that because that's an ally, right? Both of you are allies. But at the same time, it also gives Qatar more leverage because now you have a United States military base. Qatar still has relationships with Iran, by the way. Do you know that? Qatar has relationships with Iran. Qatar also hosts Hamas. Qatar also has Al Jazeera.
Right.
Al Jazeera has upset a lot of governments all over the Middle East because they're much more freer and much more outward, like in terms of their expression, which was unusual for the Middle East before Al Jazeera began. So Qatar is able to promote journalism, free press type of journalism all over the Middle East, although Israelis would disagree with me because they don't like Al Jazeera. But it's able to seep into the minds of people and promote maybe more freer space, upsetting a lot of people. And when I say upsetting, they actually had sanctions around Qatar, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia for 5 years. But guess what? Qatar made so much money that it was able to survive this thing. So it's both leveraging and also internal capacity to, you still have to make money. It's not just about being poor and but money and getting your resources right. You can be, so this small state thing can be good or bad. Like, it depends. It could be about state survival, money, getting investment and so on, or it could be like a corrupt dictator, just like saying, China, give me money, America, money type of thing.
Definitely took a huge tangent there, man. But thank you very much. No, it was useful. Don't get me wrong. It's very useful. Do not get me wrong, because I think when you're talking about the whole small state, I don't know why I had the image in my head of, those birds in the safari that like kind of chill on top of like a hippo, or maybe like on a crocodile or something like that, and both have this like mutual beneficial like sort of relationship there.
Exactly. Because the bird is getting something and the crocodile.
Exactly, right. So I think that's kind of the image that I sort of see from there. So again,
it's about being agile, being smart. Like, so if you're a small state, you have to be very smart about things. Singapore is a good example. Not only Qatar, Singapore is a good example with China and the United States. Some people accuse Singapore of being a puppet of China. No, it's being a puppet of the US, but at the same time, they have so much Chinese investment. So, it's confusing people, right? Marco Rubio calls you, then Chinese premier is coming to Zambia tomorrow. Like, people are like, wait, what?
Which is a good way to get into the Chinese premier thing, because our last topic, actually, I hope we have enough time for that, but if we can briefly talk about, I think one of the, if not the biggest one, the Chinese premier Li Qiang, I want to say Zhang, but Qiang, arrived in Zambia. Or arrives on the 19th, which is tomorrow.
Yeah.
What do you think? Why does this matter? And what do you think is, or what are you hoping to actually see happen? I'm curious.
It's critically important because China has been a very old friend of Zambia's.
Mm-hmm. Very
So
well known.
of our external debt, about 40% of our debt is owed to China, approximately $5.9 billion. This is as of end of 2023, so it's a bit outdated. It could be more. And then also China has huge investments all over Zambian industries. We are one of the biggest trading partners of China in Africa, and China is, I think, our biggest bilateral trading partner after, I think, Switzerland, export partner.
I also saw somewhere, I don't know if this could be right, but I think the number of tourists that come to Zambia, actually, the Chinese tourists surpassed Western like tourists. Like, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But I think like there's a large share of tourists actually coming from China as well.
Yeah, I mean, China, I would assume, has a lot of spending power. It has a sizable middle class. So there's a lot of spending power for people to sort of enjoy luxurious trips in Africa. And Zambia being one of the safest and most peaceful, stable countries, it's an attractive investment. It's an easy country to go to. And it's visa-free now, I think, for Chinese to come to Zambia. HH has expanded the visa-free palette. So
Although sadly, that visa free doesn't apply to other African
it's
countries.
not
So
reciprocal.
like, go ahead, if I'm not mistaken.
So, well, yeah. Southern and Eastern Africa. Southern and Eastern
For Southern
Africa.
Africans, yeah.
But yeah, so some examples of Chinese-owned mines in Zambia is NFC A Africa Mining PLC in Chambishi Copper Mine is the first and the largest, owned by the China Non-Ferrous Metals. CNMC Luansha Copper Mine, which HH talked about, I think there was an expansion of that mine, owned by China Non-Ferrous Metals Company. Zonghui Mining Kashi Mine, a major investor in Zambian copper belt. Sino Metals, Changzi Copper. Our airport was built by China. The
China.
airport expansion, Terminal 2 in Lusaka, and then the Greenfield Airport in Dola, China as well.
And
So we have a
pretty
long
sure
history,
lots of roads,
many,
probably.
many roads.
Yeah.
We have a very long history with China. Tazara obviously is the starting point
Right.
with that relationship. Is that Tanzania-Zambia railway line? So there's a lot to discuss. By the way, Tanzania-Zambia railway line they announced that it would be upgraded because
Nice.
China heard that Lobito corridor is happening, so they're like, oh, actually, let's upgrade ours. So
Actually, we have old project going on over there. Why don't
yeah,
we just
just remember, it just happened to
yeah.
remember that America is this side. Let's remember. So Zambia has the opportunity to do what I said. But let me say once again, I'm not encouraging people to have military bases. All right. What I am saying is I'm encouraging people to be more agile, then look at Zambia's relationship in a much more agile and smart manner, rather than trying. We will never be a superpower. Let me just be frank. Zambia will never be a superpower.
Jeez Louise, really?
Superpowers have to. Do you know what a superpower
Wait,
is?
wait. Okay. I think. Okay, wait. I can agree with that, but let's just you're thinking too big. All right, let's just start
No,
small.
I'm
Right?
talking about the ideal.
Let's say
Ideal state of foreign policy, right? What is the
okay.
goal?
Maybe I'm sorry. Yeah, that's my nationalist. That's my nationalism. Like kind of
To me,
screaming out.
I'm patriotic, but I really I don't even want Zambia to be a superpower. I want Zambia to be a smart power, to be able to say, to be able to. I mean, look, superpowers have to be dealt with. When you're a smart power, you have to just know how to deal with superpowers in a way that they see relevance for you and they see a necessity for you to survive. But at the same time, you're also smart enough to operationalize your internal system such that it actually makes money, right? If you're saying, I'm dealing with China and I'm dealing with the United States, and all you're doing is stealing money and going to two people in the entire country, then that's agency, but rubbishly done agency. It's Mobutu Sese Seko agency,
Right.
you know. Mobutu Sese Seko, people call him a Western puppet, but he met Chinese presidents, he met Russian presidents, you know. He was cool with pretty much everyone. It's not as one-sided as people say. So agency can be for the state, for the good of the state, invest with everyone, deal with everyone, pragmatically get
Okay.
resources.
So
or
sort of
it can
sort
be
of
a selfish,
uh
you know. So
sort of a Singaporean
yeah,
model of
so yeah,
development, right?
Singapore,
Yeah.
Rwanda tries to do it very well, but they are also very hawkish, you know.
Do you think
It's
that can I
But
ask you
the thing is,
do you think that
this foreign policy is
okay,
not an apologetic one.
I wanted to ask if maybe you have some bias towards the Singaporean model.
I do, yeah, I like it. I think it's a very
Okay.
good one.
All right. All right.
Singapore,
No, I just wanted to establish that. Yeah.
yeah. No, Singapore, all of these countries that are in a bit of a pickle, and they are, and of
They still
course,
find a way to
from superpower point of view, I want to make sure you are on my side, right? So I'll try and do divide and rule. So that's how people think. People think in international relations theory, there's this thing called realism, where everything happens about superpower. Small countries like Zambia are not considered. All you do is just fall in line or not fall in line. There's no ability for Zambia to think. There's no ability for Zambia to move around. That's the assumption that people have. So when they look at Zambia and say, "Oh, U.S. province," then China comes in. It's like, what? My brain
yeah,
is
yeah.
what's happening. So yeah, that's my ideal state, ideal foreign policy state. So, but it takes a lot of skill, and a lot of cooperation with every other system in the government, right? Like, for example, tracking investment from Qatar. What type of measurement are we going to use to track investment in that deal? You say $20 billion, but then, okay, what does success look like when $20 billion comes to a country with $30 billion? Like, what does that look like? There's not much clarity there. I think the foreign ministry should probably start doing things like that, or at least working with the Zambia Development Agency. So yeah, I think it's a good opportunity. If this is this is what I would hope, that Zambia maximizes or optimizes this international interest into something tangible, but something that is able to develop a Zambia that is agile for any sort of wave. It's able to survive. You know,
More resilient.
examples of Qatar being sanctioned by all its neighbors and able to survive for multiple years because it's made the money,
Right.
it's made its investment, and it's made its international friends. America had to even pressure the Gulf countries to say, "Hey guys, please, why are you guys hurting my bro like this? Like, I'm
Yeah.
friends with all of you guys. Like, just stop." But if Qatar was like an enemy of the United States, an enemy of China, an enemy of Iran, an enemy of Russia, they'd be like, "Yeah, die, go ahead," you know. Um, and they would have put out their military base. So when you attack these countries, there is vested interest that these countries should survive. But it also matters as to not just surviving, but thriving on all of these international interests, right? How can you maximize?
No, from my perspective, similar to what you said, I just hope that this sort of extractive model kind of changes and there's more investment that sort of goes down to the bottom. That's my main concern. Otherwise, Zambia, I feel like it's going to be the same thing, right? Tazara gets an upgrade, but then the local people are not getting anything. We get a new airport, but then the local people are still not getting anything. We have all these amazing things, but the local people, I think there was even an image, I think, in the previous government where it's a place where barely not many people have cars, but you have a perfectly tarred road. I mean, the question is, I mean, did that road really change much? I mean, there is evidence that like it helps with regards to like people who are in the transport sector, but then at the same time it does enable movements from rural areas into the capital area. So it's then you have this again urban migration, right? So there's a lot
Which
of
I
things to
think,
consider.
yeah, a lot of things to consider. Which is why I say, cooperation has to be a whole down and up type of. It shouldn't just be, diplomats and HH, because foreign policy is very much Mr. President, and then the foreign minister falls in line, right? So it has to be, even the foreign ministry has to like sort of give themselves tasks and say, okay, we agreed this thing with Qatar, we agreed this thing with Dangote, we agreed this thing with. Can we follow up? Like, what's going on here? What does success look like? Where's the money going? And is it actually meeting our interests? Which interests also should be better defined. So yeah, that's I think it's that's a very important thing.
I think that is a good place to stop because we have gone over the 1 hour limit. For those listeners who have listened to this up to this point, thank you very much. Thank you for the support. We ask that you may leave a rating on Spotify or wherever you're listening to on Apple Podcast or whatever. please leave a like. Follow us on all platforms, Instagram, where we update people with all the latest news that's going on with the continent. And if you want to stay also up to date with anything that we're doing, you can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and as well on our YouTube channel. You can definitely subscribe there. So on behalf of the entire team, thank you very much for listening, and see you guys on the next one.
I am an African.